So, sports betting webinar. We've got Michael and Laura and Karen. I'm Karen. Hello. Hopefully you can all see my screen with the GoToMeeting panel there. You should be able to ask me questions. We are happy to have questions during the presentation. We've allotted ourselves half an hour to go through this material and then 15 minutes for any questions and discussion you would like to have. But absolutely feel free to interrupt us as we go. All right, Michael, would you like to say a word about your background?
Sure. I'm Michael O'Brien. I'm the founder and principal of Mob Advocacy, a state and local government relations firm based in DC, and we do state and local government relations all over the country.
Including sports and betting?
Including some sports betting.
An interest of yours. Laura, tell me about yourself.
I'm Laura Briggs, and I work with Fantini Research. I'm the editor of our weekly public policy review, so I follow gaming legislation and I write about it all week long.
Okay, and I'm Karen, founder of Bill Track 50. We do state legislation. I'm not an expert in this topic, merely an interested party. So let us get going. Clicked on the wrong thing. Apologies. All right. So the outline for today, we're going to do a brief history of the Supreme Court case and how we got here. We're going to just take a minute to talk about what the ruling actually says. We'll look at reactions from all the different stakeholders, and then we'll spend most of our time talking about what we think is going to happen next. And then, as I said, we'll have an area for questions. All righty, here we go. Hey, Michael, how in the world did we get here?
Well, we got here because obviously sports betting has been legal in Nevada for quite some time. But back in 2011, New Jersey voters passed a constitutional amendment that would allow sports betting. Taking that vote in 2012, the New Jersey legislature passed NJS 1323, known in New Jersey as the Sports Wagering Act of 2012. As soon as it was passed, sports leagues sued the state, went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court refused to hear the case. Obviously, 2012, it didn't end there. So New Jersey looked at the case and said that what the ruling actually said was that states could not legalize sports betting. So what New Jersey did following that was repeal all the laws that made it illegal. And then they passed a new law in 2014, S 2460, which allowed sports gaming without any regulation from the state. Generally not a great idea, but you know, it was New Jersey.
Yeah.
Before that was implemented, Governor Christie asked the courts for a ruling on the legality, and that's what actually bubbled up to the Supreme Court ruling last month, which obviously ruled mostly in New Jersey's favor.
Okay. So we'll be talking a little bit more about the leagues and why they might not have wanted this and what they're going to do now a little later. But it was New Jersey versus the major leagues, right? And then that story about it going up and coming down, and there we are. Supreme Court made a ruling. Okay, so Laura, what did the Supreme Court actually do?
So they decided that the federal law violates the 10th Amendment. They basically said that Congress has the right to regulate sports gambling, but if it elects not to do so, then each state can make up its own laws.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward. And that's a pretty straightforward 10th Amendment thing, states' rights, right?
Right.
All right. So I have attached as a handout to the webinar the Supreme Court decision. So you can actually read it if you would like to read completely what it said. But that's pretty straightforward. Congress can regulate it, but if they don't, the states can. Okay. So then that brings us to what other laws might come into play here. And so I've been hearing a lot about the Wire Act. Michael, you want to explain the Wire Act to me?
Sure. The Wire Act is what prevents interstate sports betting. That's why sports betting was relegated to Nevada and never really spread beyond that. While we have other online gaming and internet gaming, sports betting never really left the state of Nevada. The Wire Act stopped transfer of funds on illegal activity. Sports betting was considered a illegal activity based on organized crime.
So that's why they were discriminating against sports betting, because organized crime, bookies and loan sharks and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, as you've seen in movies, which is generally been fairly true. Organized crime, not necessarily mafia and Italians, but organized crime in general has run sports books in the past. Even as far, I was in college. One of my college roommates was making a few $1,000s a week, running sports books. So it's
nice. All right, so there's real money in it, and then organized crime follows. So the Wire Act is very much still in force. So obviously we'll be talking about that as we go through this presentation. I've also been seeing about the Interstate Horse Racing Act. And so horse racing is a sport, but we can bet on it. So I assume this is where we carved it out and said how we could have horse race betting, right?
Right, and so it's been suggested that that might be a good framework for sports betting as well.
Okay, so if Congress decides to get involved, and we'll talk more about that, then this might be the model for how they might regulate sports betting across the country. So this article here, this is the link, if you grab the PDF, is a great write-up of all about what the Horse Racing Act does, so you can check that out. And these obviously are links to the actual acts if you want to go read all about that. Okay, so those are some laws that we'll keep in mind as we talk. So here's the reaction from the states. Basically, they swung right into action, right? So first state out of the gate, if you will, Delaware. So the governor came out immediately and said he thought they already had the necessary laws and regulations in place, and that the Delaware Lottery could regulate it. And boom, they did. They said it was going to happen, and it happened yesterday. They legal as of 1:30 yesterday afternoon. Any idea why 1:30?
My guess is it was an opening in the governor's schedule.
I see. So that was a convenient time for him to go place this bet, this $10 bet on the Phillies. Okay, so there you go. Delaware already legal. They beat New Jersey to the punch. Mississippi, their gaming commission issued some proposed rules already. Pennsylvania has issued some temporary regulations that they can move forward on. West Virginia has been working inside the state to reach certain agreements, and I found this great tweet explaining that they are moving forward, and possibly I shared it because I'm a Marshall alum, so it caught my eye. But so you can see all of these states are taking actions. Rhode Island is already holding hearings. Anything you guys want to highlight from all the stuff the states are already doing?
Well, I think the next big thing, obviously, is New Jersey, since they're supposed to be voting tomorrow.
Okay. Right. Things happening soon as tomorrow.
Yeah, I would say I think a lot of states are going to move fast in an effort to kind of hold off the federal government from having to do anything. I think the states would rather be the regulator here and have control over the system, whereas if Congress goes ahead and passes, there might be some preemption rules in there that the states aren't going to like. And so I think as many as feel that they can move or want to move forward are going to do it quickly in an effort to keep the federal government from acting.
Fair enough. So New Jersey, as we're showing you here, they've already got their bill up. They're expected to vote on it tomorrow. Could be legal, I don't know. Do you think by the end of the week, Laura?
Could be within days, I would imagine.
All right. So I have got this great picture of DraftKings say, well, this is a billboard, legal sports betting in New Jersey. You bet. Sportsbook is coming. So that is them saying they sure think it's going to happen. Connecticut said they might hold a special session to get it done. California, Michigan are still in session, so they have some time to work things out. So lots more is coming. But Michael, you had a counterexample in North Carolina.
Yes, North Carolina legislature is meeting now. They recently passed their budget. Certainly talked about sports betting. They have a bill H-279, which is fantasy sports regulation. And it was strongly supported by, obviously, the daily fantasy sports industry. A number of Christian groups spoke in opposition to the bill, and in the wake of several amendments, the bill was withdrawn just because it wasn't favorable. It was no longer favorable to industry. So I would anticipate North Carolina coming through with their long session coming up next year. I would anticipate probably a study committee over the fall and winter, and then see some legislation introduced again in 2018.
There is also a tribal casino there, and they have a recent article that came out about them. They're having discussions with the governor also, so that'll come into play as well.
So that is a little bit of the push and pull. So it's not necessarily a slam dunk in every single state. Some states want it clearly. Some states might not. All right, so moving on to the leagues, we mentioned that the leagues were not in favor of it. And originally, sued New Jersey in the first place. So what are their objections?
So a lot of their objections come into the integrity of the game, making sure the game is still fair. Nobody wants a repeat of the Black Sox scandal or some of the college basketball scandals that have happened over the years. Nobody wants, nobody wants to hear about Pete Rose imitators, betting on baseball games. And so, protecting the integrity of the game is important to the sports leagues.
So I can understand why making sports betting legal, they could make the argument that might increase the motivation for monkeying around with the games. So they are, as far as I can tell, they are now fighting for integrity fees, right?
Right. They've been asking for 1% of handle, 1% of all sports bets. So far, no state has given them that. New York may be the first. They do have a 0.25% integrity fee or royalty, whatever you'd like to call it, included in their bills. So they may actually have some success there.
But New Jersey is definitely not, right?
New Jersey is definitely not, and no uncertain terms.
I think a number of states are going to argue that with gambling, sports betting being legal in Nevada and in Canada, these sports teams the leagues are already dealing with this, and dealing with large amounts of data doesn't cost nearly as much as it did, even 10 years ago. You can process data a lot faster and cheaper. That the integrity part of that, keeping up with the data and making sure you're not seeing inconsistencies, isn't going to be a significant burden on the league.
So maybe the fees aren't warranted. What are the other points that they are arguing for?
So they're asking for certain things in the bills other than the integrity fees, such as they want bets. They don't want bets on minor league sports. They also want to be able to require the use of official league data, and they want to sell that. So basically, I think, so far I haven't seen any bill passed or come close with any of their requests.
Interesting.
I'd also say the NCAA has been very successful in terms of the daily fantasy sports, keeping a carve out for the NCAA and keeping the NCAA out of daily fantasy sports. And what you might see in these state laws is that you can't bet on college teams within your own state.
Right.
And I believe right now that's definitely in Delaware's regulation. I haven't read all of New Jersey's bill yet, so I'm not positive, but I would expect to see language like that in the state bills moving forward.
Okay, so that's what they'll be lobbying for. But clearly the leagues, one of the things they're trying to do is get a little bit of money out of the whole amount of money sloshing around that will be sloshing around from the sports betting. So I think that's why Mark Cuban said the value of all top 4 teams just doubled following the ruling. They'll figure out a way for sure.
It could be also that we see instead of these kind of arrangements being put into legislation, we could see private agreements, which is what appears to be happening in West Virginia right now.
Right. Yes, from that tweet that I had. Okay. So moving on to how the market reacted. William Hill, who are they? Laura?
Sorry. William Hill, they're one of the biggest bookmakers. They actually have the majority of the Nevada market.
So we can see what their stock did after the ruling. And then Penn National Gaming is another
regional operator.
And you can see how their stock did after. What other kind of financial reactions have we seen?
We've seen actually the increase in revenues in Nevada in April. I guess with all of the hype about sports betting in April, they finally topped 300 million, which is pretty impressive.
That's pretty for a month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
And we've got some of the stock since Delaware announced. Canby is up almost 24%. Dover Downs over 14%. Kindred over 8%. GVC over 3%.
And that's just in a couple of days, right? Since Delaware announced?
Yeah. Within the last week, yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, so the markets are loving it. No surprise, I guess. Okay, so then what is Congress's role if the states are moving forward? We've got Orrin Hatch saying that he might introduce a bill, but he hasn't really said very much about it yet. But on the other side, we've got the American Gaming Association president saying he thinks the states can be effective regulators. So to your point earlier, Michael, the states are trying to put some reasonable rules in place to show Congress they don't need to act, right?
Yes, I would imagine if Senator Hatch does indeed introduce a bill, you're going to see a number of governors coming out lobbying against it. I think the states really want to have control here. It's an issue that, I think there's a number of issues that the states really want to control bubbling through courts and Congress, but gaming is definitely one of them. And they've regulated it on casinos. They've regulated it on lotteries. There's no reason states aren't going to push back and say, hey, we can handle this in our own state.
Okay. And speaking of people who got it, we've got our map of the state legislatures and kind of what they've done so far. And not every state's going to want it, right? So if Congress doesn't act, and we don't really think they will, at least not very soon, then we've got this patchwork. So Nevada, and now a brand new Delaware is blue, blue for legal. And then the other states are all following that. And I wanted to highlight the fact that most of the states don't meet year-round. So this little map from NCSL shows what states are in session and out of session. So these purple states are all already out. The gray states didn't even meet this year. So only the green states are still meeting. And then these tan ones are in special session, and there'll probably be another few special sessions. So most of the states are actually out for the year, which is why a lot of activity is going to happen later and January when the states come back into session. That means
pretty much every state that has considered a bill has already come out and said that they're going to be pushing those bills again next year. So I think we can have a lot more activity next year.
Yeah, you also have green states on there that even while they say that they go year round, given that it's an election year in a lot of states, they are going to shut down for a good chunk of time starting in the next couple weeks.
Right, like Illinois.
So there's not a lot of legislative time in Illinois, New York, Massachusetts to get this stuff done.
Right. So a little preview of what might happen next year then. That link goes to a list of all of the bills from this year. And this will be updated every day. So towards the end of the year, you can come look and see what new bills are being introduced from all of these states. But this will have the bills that have passed, as well as a bunch of relevant regulation or legislation you might want to look through. So you'll see most of these died, not all of them, some of them passed. So this is going to be available to you if you want to bookmark this. You can come back to it anytime and click and read any one of these bills. So that's here on this state slide. And then we've got the tribal gaming. And this is a great quote saying that the tribes should be given a seat at the table because of their experience. And they've been regulating gaming. And so, Laura, you're thinking that if states make it legal, then it's going to be legal for tribal gaming too, right?
I think so. I think that it's going to be the trickiest to regulate tribal and commercial sports betting at the same time in some of these states. But under the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, sports betting is considered a Class 3 game. So in my thoughts, and I'm not a legal expert, but I would think that would mean that if states legalize it, the gaming tribes can have it as well. There's going to be a few things that are a little trickier, such as integrity fees. Probably would not be legal for leagues to charge tribes because the way they're set up, they can really only be, they can't be taxed. They can really only be charged fees by the state. So I don't know how that would play out.
So this will be complicated.
It will be. And then one of the other issues would be the tribes that can offer gaming, they have to offer gaming within their reservations. And so online would be tricky for them. So that's another big issue.
And online is going to be tricky anyway, so that's double tricky.
Right.
All right. Well, the Indian Gaming Association, this website is a great website, so you can keep an eye on that if this is of interest to you. But yeah, that's our conclusion. It's going to be complicated. All right. So what happens next? So as far as in-state actors, so bricks and mortar stores, I have with us a guest from the future, from a nation that has already legalized sports betting. So in Great Britain, they've had legal sports betting for how long? Forever. So can you bet on any street corner?
You can. So we've always had betting. Gambling's always been allowed, but obviously been regulated quite tightly. But betting shops, bookmakers are a common sight on the high street. William Hill, Coral, Every high street will have one. Generally quite sort of seedy, disreputable establishments filled with old men. Traditionally, in the day when to make a bet, you had to actually go to the shop, look up the odds, write your bet down on a piece of paper and take it to the counter. But there's always been certain sporting events throughout the year where it was traditional for the wider public to actually go and place a bet, such as the Grand National Horse Race or the FA Cup final, Football Cup final. And the betting shops would always compete very heavily to attract people in and try and make themselves seem, they'll actually clean the floor and spruce the place up a little bit, in the hope, obviously, to attract people in. But things have changed over the years, and now most betting is online, and so all of the big players offer apps which are horrifyingly easy to use, extremely well designed, so you can just gamble at the push of a button now. So things have moved away from the high street and much more onto advertising on television.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that when we get to the online part.
Okay, so so gambling is changing and it is raising lots of issues and certainly causing lots of problems.
So it's certainly true that many bricks and mortar stores are already suffering, competing with the internet. So obviously we've got the Wire Act that's going to be a confounding factor here. But Michael, what do you see happening bricks and mortar anyway? Obviously, I mean, some people are going to want to take advantage and start selling the product of sports betting, right?
Certainly. I think states are going to look at casinos and racetracks first. That's the logical place to start. They already offer gambling and gaming. This is just another piece. So it's going to make compliance and oversight go a lot smoother. I think some states could look at an OTB model. In New York and other states, they have standalone betting locations. This model could easily go in, and as well as betting on horses, you could go in and take bets on sports very easily. It's a model that's friendly to localities because it gives them the ability to have some control over where gaming happens in their communities with zoning and other local codes.
Do you think there'll ever be as much of it as there is in Great Britain, where there's literally one on every main street?
I think it easily could. In Canada, you have kiosks that are in, like your 7-Eleven and your convenience stores. You can go in and place a $2 bet as easily as playing the Powerball, which I did not win yesterday. So, life goes on. Bars and restaurants, certainly I think that's a place to look. Some states already offer Keno or Keno-like games. In Virginia, there are 2 OTB locations located inside full-service bars and restaurants. You can see the awning in the picture there. It says "Eat, Drink, Win," and so I think those are options for bricks and mortar. Down the line, what's going to be the interesting debate is, will this happen in stadiums? Will making a small wager be part of your pregame ritual? As you're grabbing a beer and a hot dog, are you going to pop $2 on the game? And so I think those are the big bricks and mortar questions. They'll start at casinos and could go to kiosk restaurants and stadiums down the line.
And this is obviously going to vary state by state, because it always does. I'm sorry, Laura, what were you going to say?
Add to that depending on the state as well, you've got states like Illinois and Louisiana that have their lottery operations throughout bars and restaurants. And if that is doable with sports betting as well, then that opens up a lot of locations for sports betting in certain states.
All right, but let's talk about the infinite locations. So this is our last slide before our questions, and we'll try to keep it brief. I know we're just about at time. And we do have a question from the audience, actually, which plays into this slide. So first, I'm going to highlight this quote, Joe Asher from William Hill, who we've mentioned a couple times, saying that there's lots of illegal betting right now, $1 billion a month from the largest handling, largest online book handling place during football season. And he's saying that people, given the choice, prefer to be in the legal regulated market. I agree with that. I think he's right. People would certainly rather bet legally if they can. So the question from the audience, don't DraftKings and FanDuel already basically facilitate sports betting? And so how have they been skirting the existing laws? And then what's going to happen to them with these new laws?
Sure. DraftKings and FanDuel offer daily fantasy sports, and what they've argued to states where it's legal to do those in those states is that daily fantasy sports is not gambling, but instead it's a game of skill. Right. That you have to have some knowledge of the sport to succeed. So it's not gaming. It's not a chance that you have no control over. That's how they've avoided the sports betting laws. But my guess is, very quickly within an hour of that decision coming out, I got an email from DraftKings asking me to contact my state legislator and talk about online sports betting. So they're looking to capitalize on the market.
Yeah, they're motivated, right? So I think I've got that page for us to look at. All right, so then obviously, actually I think I don't. So it being legal in Britain, and you can bet online while you're watching the game. How has that impacted, I imagine there's a lot of commercials during games for...
Yes, absolutely. So the commercials used to be purely for gambling purposes. So just saying you can bet on the game and just advertising a particular company. But now they tend to be focused more on actual in-game betting. So they will actually offer you live odds during the break, saying we offer certain odds on this player to score next, or some sort of event that could happen within the game. And they'll also at the same time say, if you come online now and we'll give you some free money to start betting. And also they express a sense of urgency, so you have to do it now. And they have loud, shouty celebrities sort of fronting this activity. So it's all very, very clever advertising, because it's actually based on what's already happened in the game. And so it's sort of adaptive to what's going on in the game. But this has caused all sorts of problems, because obviously children watch sports games, and there are strict rules against advertising gambling to children. And this is exploiting a loophole. So they have actually recently cracked down on it and said you can't offer free money in that way. Or you have to be very clear about the rules around offering free money, and you're not allowed to express that sense of urgency, which is obviously more likely to make people leap onto the internet and start spending their money. And there's a big drive to actually ban that kind of betting entirely.
So that does sound pretty seductive, and honestly sounds kind of fun.
Yeah.
So it's easy to imagine online betting and sports betting and betting during games while you're watching them. What's going to keep us from doing that? We already mentioned the Wire Act. So how do they get around that, Michael?
So the Wire Act prohibits interstate sports betting. And so to get around it, I believe most states, or like a company like DraftKings or FanDuel, will have to have Nexus in individual states.
What does that mean?
I think it means they'll have to have server locations within that state, and they'll have kind of strict electronic borders preventing people from other states from using those direct sites. What this could do is open some doors and lower some barriers to entry for some smaller competitors. You might see some single state or some regional operators that might be able to get up and running with that Nexus faster than a DraftKings or a FanDuel. And so I think you'll see a lot
like
of...
Steven was just describing.
Yeah, I think you'll see some... competition, and then over the next few years, those who are good at it will remain, and you'll then see, the market kind of constrict again.
Right. Like any new thing. So, Laura, I have to think that this is going to be a lot of money.
I would think so. I mean, if you look at Nevada when they started offering mobile apps in 2010, if you look at the revenue growth between 2009 and 2017 was 82%. And then if you compare that to
So they almost doubled just when they allowed online gambling.
Right. From allowing.
And you still had to be in Nevada to do it, right?
I'm sorry?
And you still had to be in Nevada to do it?
Yes, you have to be in the state to do it, and it's mobile apps offered through the sports betting companies. But 82% growth, yeah, I would say that's a positive for mobile, definitely.
So they will figure out the nexus in each state, and they will do it.
I think so. Depending on, obviously, but.
Right, depending on if the state makes it legal. And I absolutely agree again with Joe Asher here that people would prefer to do it legally. So questions coming in. And let's see, how are they going to regulate the type of monopoly that DraftKings or FanDuel are already set up for? The interstate ban makes sense, but this does seem like it could be an issue with monopolization because there's already tech and brand awareness. So do we worry about monopolies getting formed?
There's a number of regulatory pieces within states because when DraftKings and FanDuel started, there was some of it rumor, some of it conjecture, some of it fact that the employees were sharing data, and that you would have people with a lot of data from FanDuel playing on DraftKings, and so states caught wind of that and have dealt with how do you deal with those monopolies or duopolies within the state. So some regulation will certainly happen. I think the Nexus issue will open the door to some new players. But again, it's going to be up to the market to have them succeed. Certainly DraftKings and FanDuel have an advantage in terms of some name recognition. But most of these states don't have the regulations written yet. And so you might see pieces from the state that give some advantages to some small businesses and new players. That's certainly possible. But some states will leave it up to the market. So it'll be interesting. Again, the strongest players will survive. 3, 4, or 5 years from now, you'll probably see 2, 3, 4 players that gobbled up a number of other smaller single state and regional players. So,
all right. That's interesting to think about it being insider trading. Like if you see how everyone's betting, then that's knowledge that you shouldn't be allowed to bet on.
I would take a look though, as states are putting out rules for comment. Every comment sent to the state is then public. You can request to see. It'd be interesting to see what kind of regulatory capture DraftKings and FanDuel are looking to use. If they're looking to use, that's certainly been a trick of established companies using regulatory advantages to keep out other competitors. So it'll be interesting. Absolutely. Once those comments are available to go in and see what their comments were on different parts of regulation, and then you'll know kind of what their strategy is and be able to have an idea of how to help increase competition in that space.
All right, then we've got a philosophical question to kind of finish up on. So from kind of a social and philosophical perspective, do more moves toward expanded gambling volume, which I think that this will cause, represent regressive socioeconomics. So the general public losing some percentage of their disposable income. Do you think that's going to give states pause as they start considering legislation?
Personally, probably yes. On, is it socioeconomically regressive? Probably yes. Will it give states pause? Probably not. I don't think it's going to be a big part of their worry. You might see, and there's a great article from Pew linked in from the last slide on what they think states will do in terms of assistance for gambling addiction. But I would agree with Pew in that I don't think states are going to put a lot of resources to it. I think some, but probably not as much as they should.
Right.
It's actually a subject that comes up a lot pretty much in any type of gambling expansion in states. There's always some type of gambling addiction that comes into play, and a lot of times they'll write into the bill or the regulations some type of allotment from what the state gets in revenue to help combat those issues.
Like with tobacco or something like that.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you. Great questions. Thank you, question askers. Hopefully that covered what you were looking for. And just time for some closing thoughts. So, Michael, last comments?
If you have any questions about anything that came up, feel free to reach out. But certainly, I would expect a lot of states to be talking about this in the next session. If you don't see legislation in every state where it's not passed before the end of the year, I'd be surprised. It doesn't mean it's going to win everywhere, but it'll be discussed, certainly.
Laura, any final thoughts?
I agree. I think it's an exciting time, and I think we're going to see a lot of legislative action over the next probably year and a half. So something good to follow on.
I am really interested to see what different ideas states come up with what they allow and what they don't. And then I'm interested to see what entrepreneurs can come up with to enter the market. So it is interesting times indeed. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for attending the webinar. You will get an email with a link to the webinar, and there are some handouts you can grab. So Fantini's newsletter that Laura works on I added that as a handout. You can grab it about sports betting. The Supreme Court decision is attached. And also this entire webinar, if you would like this in PDF form with all of the links and all of the information we've got in here, you can grab that as well. So click on those real quick. And thanks again for coming. And have a great day, everybody. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Karen.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.